And so I think this is really important. And I so admire you for sharing your story in such detail about your journey, because I think this is what normalizes it. This is what helps other women say, okay, I have to talk about this, right? With my doctors, with the people I trust, so that I get the care that I deserve.
Welcome to the Inflammation Code podcast. It's me, your host, Dr. Shivani Gupta, and I have a special guest in store for you today. A wonderful woman who I just met at a conference a couple weeks ago, but we are so in alignment. So I'm excited for this episode today. So Meghan Rabbitt is an award-winning journalist and author of The New Rules of Women's Health, your guide to thriving at every age. She specializes in writing about women's health and wellness, and her work has appeared in many national publications, including Women's Health, Oprah Daily, Prevention, Maria Shriver's Sunday paper, which I personally read and love every weekend. And she's known for translating complex medical and scientific topics into clear, actionable information, and for telling stories that help readers like us better understand their bodies, their health, and themselves. So welcome to the podcast, Meghan.
Thank you so much. I am thrilled to be here.
Well, I loved meeting you at that conference in New York just a few weeks ago. I was excited about your book. I was really excited that you have been on the team with Maria Shriver all these years. I have read her newsletter for well over a decade, and I've always loved how it has this really balanced, like opening your Sunday paper with your coffee feeling that really brings a message home that we all need in that given moment. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. And I passed that along to Maria after we chatted, and she was touched. And I think that's really what we try to do at the Sunday paper, right? Is rise above the noise, as Maria says. And Maria is on a mission to highlight voices who she calls architects of change. And I think that's really powerful. And it really is uplifting, right? It's nice to get that hit of good news in a Sunday send, right?
True. Very true. So you have this new book that came out this year in January 2026. And the book is called The New Rules of Women's Health. And I'm so excited to dive into this book and your research and what you discovered. What inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, so Maria Shriver asked me to write this book for her imprint. So it was a wild experience. I was out in LA with the Sunday paper team. We were brainstorming and talking about all kinds of topics. And she looked at me, we were having lunch, and Maria looked at me and she said, Meghan, I want you to write a book about women's health. I think you should write a book about women's health. I think we need a new manifesto for women. We need a book that covers women's health topics from puberty through menopause and beyond. Because, for far too many years, we were just studying the male body. We were doing research in men and applying that data in women. And we know now the fallout from that, right? Because we don't have enough answers that we need to understand why women disproportionately suffer from certain diseases, why we have different symptoms in some diseases than men. And so she was like, I want you to get into it. And so Maria Shriver asks you to write a manifesto, and you get to work. I will say, I got to work, and it was a 3-year process. I interviewed over 100 all-female experts for this book. I hired fact checkers to make sure everything was accurate. And I really want this to feel like a guide for women that's science-backed, that they can tuck into and tuck out of based on what feels up in your life when it comes to your health.
Nice. I love that. I love that. And I think we need it. And I think we need so much more of it. I am so passionate about women's health. And every time I've run into a wall when it comes to my own care, which anyone who is my listener to this podcast knows, I've had a long journey of struggling with my health, which is why I teach health now, because I want to save everyone else that heartache and pain. I feel like we've run into so many walls. And oftentimes when I meet women and clients who find me, they're like, yeah, that's just, I got so sick and tired of trying to get answers. I just decided to deal with it. And so in your book, I know you talk about something that fascinates me. You talked about anatomy and how when we talk about anatomy nowadays, we're not really standardizing the use of our anatomical terminology. And I know the listeners probably like, what is that? But here's the thing. When we talk about women's health, I think it's really about respect, understanding How are we training all systems of medicine, Western, Eastern, all of them, to understand us better so we can get the answers we need, so we can get the treatment we need properly when we need it? And I think there's so many gaps there. So will you
Oh,
go into the terminology piece? And then will you also go into why is it that women, I know the answer, but will you explain to our listener, why is it that we're not studied as women? Like, why are we just
oof.
totally skipped over? And they're like,
Yeah.
women are little men and y'all will be just fine if you just do what we need.
Yeah. So I think that's really, I'll start there because that was really fascinating to me. For years, we just didn't study women. It actually wasn't until 1993 that the NIH was finally, said, okay, we have to include women and minorities in clinical trials that are funded by the NIH. Just 1993. I'm 47 now. I was a freshman in high school in 1993. So when I think about how recent that is in our history, it wasn't actually until 2012 that the NIH launched a gynecologic branch to study conditions like uterine fibroids and endometriosis. And so it's like 2012, like when you think
That's
about that.
insane.
Mhm.
No wonder we
So
don't have enough answers.
no wonder exactly. And no wonder why even our well meaning healthcare practitioners, when we ask them, why do women disproportionately suffer from autoimmune diseases? Oftentimes they say, we don't actually know. And that's not because they're not great doctors and nurse practitioners and physician's assistants and integrated practitioners. It's because the data doesn't exist, right? And so, multiple reasons for that. There was the fact that women were considered more variable because of
Mm.
our menstrual cycles and our varying hormones, and then the hormonal dip that happens in menopause, right? And so that impacts data. That's not a reason not to study us, as we now know, but that was one of the reasons. I think also what was more surprising to me when I tucked into the reporting is that multiple people said, a lot of times, think about who was deciding what got researched. It was men. Men were in those positions of power to decide where the research dollars were going to go. And they didn't deal with the crippling pelvic pain of, conditions like endometriosis. And so there was a little bit of, that going on. And then I think also one of the more logical reasons is that we get pregnant, right? And they didn't want to potentially mess with our reproductive health. And there has been a history of pregnant women in trials where there have been babies with birth defects. And so that kind of set us back as well. Luckily, things are changing, right? There are more women are being required to be in studies now. But that's not to say we're where we need to be. Everybody I talked to said we're still far behind and we've got a big game of catch up to play. It's
1993 and 2012. It's
shocking.
It
Yeah.
is shocking. It actually explains so much, and I agree with you, and I love the kind of tone you took there, where you didn't say, "It's their fault and this is ridiculous," which sometimes I get on my soapbox about it, and I get really frustrated. You said, "The doctors mean well. The research is not there. Those decisions were made by a group who didn't really have this pain point." And so really the shift that has to happen is women in medicine, women in research, women pushing for this because we know firsthand what the issues are that we struggle with.
Yeah,
And so,
absolutely.
will you speak briefly into that anatomical thing? Because I
Yeah.
found that fascinating too.
I love that you asked this question because I really felt passionate about including a chapter on anatomy because those of us who don't go into healthcare professions, we just don't get a good education about our bodies. I think you ask most women where our various anatomical parts are, and we just don't know. There's a lot that's surprising and that's detrimental to us, right? Because if we know vaguely, even a baseline understanding of our organs, right?
Yeah,
And that goes even beyond our reproductive organs. It can just help us have more elevated conversations with our doctors. One of
true.
the most surprising things in my research is I interviewed anatomists and mostly female anatomists who are saying, look, there is a big push among anatomists to stop using anatomical eponyms. And so these are terms that are named after the usually white male who laid claim to that body part. So a great example of this is the fallopian tube. I had no idea that the fallopian tubes are named after an Italian priest who claimed to have discovered them. When he was, back in the day, and his last name was Fallopio. And that's why we call them fallopian tubes. And so the push now is to call them uterine tubes. And the reason for this is because words matter.
Yes.
Let's try to move past a sexist history in medicine. And this is one big step. I won't even say small step. It's one big step we can take to do that. But also, it has another benefit, which is that those people who do go into medical school or nursing or any of the healthcare professions and they need to learn anatomy, uh, eponyms add to cognitive load. It's
Sure.
hard to remember if you're trying to memorize some man's last name. It's a lot easier to remember what the name of the organ is if it's named based on where it is in the body. So the push is to use and fallopian tubes is a very obvious example. Most of us know the term fallopian tubes, right? But there's a number of other examples of this. And so I thought that was fascinating.
For sure. I think it's fascinating because you're right. If we're always talking about these body parts of women and we're calling them these far-fetched names, like I read in your book, it talked about Bartholin's gland and then Fallopio, the Gabriel Fallopio is the priest. And I was like, are these all names from The Lord of the Rings? Like, how far back do we have to remember all these names? And if it's just there, then no wonder everyone's like, yeah, it's just complicated. Women's health is just complicated. I know for myself, 2022, I discovered I had a fibroid because I ended up in the hospital in crippling pain. I tried to avoid going to the hospital because I don't like those places. Ended up there, and they did a contrast CT, and they're like, "Oh, must be your fibroid." And I saw that image and thought, "That's like a dragon's egg. That's pretty significant. That's not a small one in there. 10 centimeters. It's occupying space." And so I tried all my natural methods. I talked to all my integrative practitioners. We tried to win at it. We did not, based on the type of life speed I run at. Now looking back, I'm like, I would have approached that differently. So I ended up getting a surgery. But I did such a high volume of research. I interviewed 10 different doctors. I met with so many people. I went to University of Miami. And it took me such a level of discovery to finally reach that endpoint of finding a surgeon who said, you can keep your uterus. I don't need to take your uterus out. You can do an embolism. But by then I had already done a research paper, ablation, embolism, different types of hysterectomies. My most frustrating thing and experience then, and if you knew me back then, I journaled heavily about it online, was why do we think that so many women's organs are just so optional? Like, why is it that it's just not a big deal to clean everything out and put us into medical menopause? Are we not seeing what that does to women? And so that's why I was so excited that you wrote this book. Is it seems like you're really making a argument for understanding women's health at each stage. And we're having this beautiful conversation right now around menopause is not an end point at 50 or 60 where from then onwards you don't need healthcare. We actually
Oh,
so much more. And so in your book, you talk about that gap that happens from 40 to 60 years old, where we're just kind of in a dead zone of lack of care. So will you speak into that a little bit? Because I think that's such an important point for women to hear and understand and address.
I love this question so much. And I would love to talk about fibroids as well. So let's
Please.
put a pin in that because I also had fibroids. I had a uterus full of fibroids. So when my fibroids were diagnosed, I had every type you could have in every place they could be. I had one that was probably, it wasn't quite grapefruit sized, but quite big. And so I think this is really important. And I so admire you for sharing your story in such detail about your journey because I think this is what normalizes it. This is what helps other women say, okay, I have to talk about this, right? With my doctors, with the people I trust so that I get the care that I deserve. So that I would love to go into my story and hear more about yours too because I
For
think
sure.
it's going to help women. But I think when it comes to that midlife gap, I interviewed Dr. Lisa Larkin, who's an incredible women's health practitioner and a breast cancer survivor. And she says the medical system is failing women after our reproductive years. During our reproductive years, we're going to the doctor multiple times a year, usually, certainly if we're pregnant and have babies, right? There are so many different touch points. But then once the 40s roll around, even though we might be starting to feel the perimenopause symptoms, you know, hopefully you're going for your annual well woman exam, right? But also life tends to get busy and we're taking care of young kids. Maybe we're taking care of aging parents. We're in the height of our careers. And so life is just going on this new pace of like, whoa, like I am in it. And oftentimes our own health goes by the wayside. One of my best friends, actually, I was on a hike with her. I live here in Boulder and we're hiking outside and the sun is shining. And I said to her, I was like, what? We started talking about health screenings and she was a little behind on her colonoscopy, behind on her mammogram. And I said, when have you gotten a skin cancer check? She's fair skinned like me. She was a lifeguard in her youth. And she's like, about 10 years ago. I said, girl, you got to get there. You got to make that appointment. But I think I share that I don't want her to feel, I didn't want her to feel shamed, but it was more like we have to encourage each other as women in midlife to follow up on these things, to get our screenings and to take care of ourselves. Because what Dr. Larkin told me is that if you in your 40s, in your 50s, even in your 30s, get care, preventive care, that's what keeps you from having to see all the ologists when you're in your 60s and 70s and 80s.
True.
And so I really stepped away from reporting this book feeling like, oh, wow, I've got such a window of opportunity right now in my life to double down on really healthy practices and lifestyle habits that are going to optimize my health, not only now, but in the future.
It's true. It's a big deal that we invest in these years. And you're right, it can get so busy. In my case, my kids are teenagers. And so suddenly it got easier on the motherhood front, not completely easy, but easier. And so
Yeah.
I went for it with my book launch over this last year. And we were sharing beforehand, I kind of had to shove everything in my life aside to really prioritize getting the book out in the world. And you're right. At times like that, anytime we have like those peak life moments, maybe good, maybe bad, could be that your life got busier because you're caretaking or career went sideways or I don't know, world events right now, who knows? But as we're going through life, if we're always going to shove aside our appointments, then are we going to miss out on so much care along the way? And it's not easy to get into a doctor's appointment. And I remember once I did go to a traditional primary care appointment. And I showed up with a list. And I was like, I think we need to look into all these things. And they basically looked at me, I was in my 30s, and they said, you're too young. You're fine. You don't have a thyroid problem. Nothing on that list is valid. You're too young. And I said, no, no, no. I feel like garbage. I'm telling you something is wrong. I know my energy level, my brilliance, my intelligence, like everything is falling apart here. I need help. And they're like, you'll be fine. Go see endocrinology. Endocrinology is like, you're not full blown yet. We have nothing for you. That was one of those peak moments where I was like, okay, we're going to have to change the approach here. I need a whole different toolkit, a whole different set of doctors to approach this. And so, will you share about your fibroid story? Because I feel like
Yeah.
my research in life is never ending because
Yeah.
these topics need so much research to understand your options and to then understand who's the right practitioner for you, who intuitively
Yes.
feels right to actually partner with you for your care.
Yes. And you know what's so fascinating? So I think so many women can relate to what you said. They have symptoms, they go to a doctor, they feel totally gaslit, not seen, not heard. It's totally unacceptable. And so I imagine for you, it was like, okay, time to find a new doctor who's actually going to take me seriously. And hopefully, if you have some options, that is a major red flag. If you're coming to a doctor proactively with symptoms and they're like giving you the brush off, oh my gosh, like, no, no way, not good enough anymore, right? For me, and I think this is really important to talk about because my experience was different. I brushed my own symptoms off.
Mm.
So here's what happened with me. I was dealing with extremely heavy periods to the point where I know my blood work showed that I was borderline anemic, but I think I was full blown, right? I couldn't even roll over in bed without getting a little dizzy or risking getting dizzy. I just was hemorrhaging, as I called it, for 2, 3 days, sometimes of my period. And because my cycle was still happening every 28 days like clockwork, I just thought, you know what? I think I was in my late 30s when this started happening, when I started really noticing the super heavy bleeding, I was like, well, it's probably perimenopause. And I brushed it off. I didn't go to my doctor. And instead, actually, what I think I did in my doctor's visits was like, I wanted to get like a gold star. I'm a straight A, go-getter kind of chick. And I literally was like, look at me. My cycle is every 28 days. How great am I? And meanwhile, I really think I went years without someone being able to look because I shared honestly what symptoms I was going through to be able to find fibroids when there were fewer of them and they were smaller to be able to have more treatment options. So by
Sure.
the time and here's the catch for me is that by the time my fibroids were diagnosed, the only option for me was hysterectomy.
Wow.
So that's pretty remarkable. And I was devastated. I think as anyone can relate to when we take care of ourselves, like I am a health journalist. I like work hard at my health. I take care of myself. And when something like that happens, you're just like, you feel like your body has betrayed you in a way. And I just was so devastated. I tried to remind myself that thankfully uterine fibroids are usually benign. So at least I wasn't dealing with a cancer diagnosis, right? But good news for me, and I did something very similar to you. I interviewed doctors. I
Mm.
interviewed surgeons to make sure that hysterectomy was my only option. And sure enough, 5 out of 5 said hysterectomy is your only option. So then I was like, okay, I really do believe that. This is not just my uterus is, dismissible, right?
Sure.
But I also really interviewed these surgeons to see who did I want to be my doctor? Who did I want to be my partner in this major surgery? And who was talking through my options with me and what the implications were, et cetera. And so I really encourage all women to take that on. No matter what you're going through, you can go to a doctor with your notebook, with your symptoms, and listen to your intuition about who is the right person to help you with your health journey. And the final thing I'll add about the hysterectomy, and I think which is great news for me, is that a lot of people assume that if you have a hysterectomy, you're in full blown menopause. Like everything comes out, including your ovaries. I was able to keep my ovaries. So, to be quite honest with you, for me, based on my symptoms, the bulk symptoms of my fibroids, which were just creating so much inflammation, as well as the heavy periods that were creating anemia, like, when I tell you I feel like a brand new person and I'm still cycling. I'm not in full blown menopause because my ovaries are still there. So I had a total hysterectomy with bilateral salpingectomy. And so that's my uterus, my cervix, and my tubes are gone, but my ovaries are there. And
Wow.
so I think it's so important that we share these stories because a lot of women go through it, right? And a lot of women are like, how do I navigate this? And it's navigatable with education.
It's true. And I think the more we talk about it, the more, like you said, we bring awareness to it. Back when I discovered that I had a fibroid, I was like, that's benign. Like, I'm not dealing with that then. I'm not touching that. I'm a pretty anti surgery person. And so as I went down that road and started interviewing doctors, what I've also learned from different women around me is it takes time to get these doctor's appointments. It costs money to go to the doctor. For me, I have great insurance, so it's like a copay. I don't think much about it. In my case, also, I'm married into an all medical family, so I was very lucky. I had access. I could just get the cell phone numbers of 10 doctors and have these conversations. I didn't have to go in for all those appointments. And so that's also where I find there's such a struggle and a frustration right now because we're not getting the time. Not everyone's on the same page. Not everyone's on the same page about perimenopause and hormone health. So it's almost like you're trying to navigate through the darkness for yourself. And if you're trying to go through those insurance-based doctors, sometimes you finally get to that appointment and they're like, I can't do anything for you covered by
Yeah.
insurance. And then you get stuck. And so that's where a long time ago, I had to choose a totally new doctor team in the integrative functional space because I was like, my health issues are large. I am an autoimmune patient. I have been my whole life. So the navigation of that is complex. It's going to take someone more time.
Yeah.
And so as you wrote this book and you talked about the research that wasn't done early on autoimmune, what were some of those things that you discovered? Because I think it's so important to even talk about the statistics around women and autoimmune. women and Alzheimer's, women and heart disease. Like as women, if we heard those every day, I think we would change our behavior, you
Oh
know?
my gosh, I think you're totally right. And it's funny as we talk, I'm going to flip to that section of my book to make sure I get the stats right because you are 100% correct. It's like most women don't know that we are 2/3 the cases of Alzheimer's disease. I mean, take that on board for a second. A full 2/3 the cases of Alzheimer's disease are women. So like how is that possible? How do we not have more research? Now, thankfully, we are starting to play the game of catch up and we are starting to understand that actually the menopause transition, interestingly, is a real pivotal moment for women's brains, right? And we're starting to unpack why and all the ways estrogen works in the brain. Um, but yeah, when it comes to autoimmunity, I mean, you might know the stat as well as I search for it, but isn't it something to the tune of 80% of diagnoses of autoimmunity is in women?
Yes. And I see so many women who are on the autoimmune spectrum. They have one autoimmune condition, then they kind of tend to stack up. So they end up with two or three. They end up going to rheumatology and saying, okay, like, what's the solution? And rheumatology, from everyone I've heard, is like, here is your painkiller, and here is one other drug that you can take. And then that's it. Like, here's our two solutions for you. You can try to manage through lifestyle. And so
Yeah.
then they're like, well, after that, what's the next solution? The next solution is biologics. So much more heavy hitting solutions that are more expensive, that have bigger side effects. So then women say, well, I don't want to end up put on that for life because that's a whole different commitment. And I'll probably have to stay stuck on that commitment. And so women are really struggling with like, what is causing this? Why is this here? And I'm an Ayurvedic practitioner. So from the Ayurvedic perspective, we're like, we know the answer to this one. This is a preventive health plan that we just never got taught in the West. This is your circadian clock, your elemental design. How are you addressing gut health? Gut health is the center of everything. What is your diet? How are you honoring a circadian diet? How are you using super spices to win? So I teach about that all day long, but I'm always wondering why, when we do go to the doctor, why they don't say, your lifestyle is actually the key. Like, if you want to actually unlock reversing this, it's lifestyle. Let me refer you to some great integrative medicine practitioners. We have them in every city. Let's talk about acupuncture. Let's talk about chiropractic medicine. Let's talk about your gut health. Let me refer you to functional medicine for gut health. You have options.
Yeah.
And then say, just so you know, I'm going to mitigate and manage your symptoms. Let me give you some symptom solutions while I explain to you that all of this matters. And so I see that revolution happening slowly. Integrative rheumatology is coming around. And that to me is really exciting because that's what women need right now.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, 100%. I couldn't agree more. And I feel like, for me, what makes logical sense is it's inflammation, right? Like, what is autoimmunity? It's your immune system making a bit of a mistake, right? And attacking healthy tissue. And based on the healthy tissue it's attacking, that turns up as a various autoimmune disease. And in my mind, again, I am not a doctor, I'm a health journalist, but what I do hear from doctors who I interview all the time is that inflammation is at the root cause of so many of our diseases, right? And so if we can tackle the inflammation code, if we can get the inflammation code, exactly. And like, I don't know about you, but like for me, so I have autoimmunity in my family. My mom has thyroid stuff. My dad even has asthma and some other autoimmune stuff. So this is really on my radar. I don't have symptoms right now. I am knocking on all the wood as I say that. But I am very conscious of the fact that based on my family history and what I know, and I think this is another really important point that all of our healthcare practitioners want us to do is talk to our family about what they're going through. Make sure we can show up with a nuanced family health history so that we can see, oh, look at that. Like in my line of people, inflammation is always there. And I think it's really something that I need to stay clued into. And when I am focused on all of these things that we know help inflammation, help quiet and tame that, like, silent fire, I just feel better too. It's remarkable how much inflammation, that low grade inflammation can just, I think that is what makes us kind of constantly just feel like meh.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, that's not good enough. I want to feel great, right?
Totally. And it's
Yeah.
interesting when you look at the research and the science, we will all be more inflamed over time. We're going to have more insulin resistance over time. I presented at this big longevity conference a couple of years ago on turmeric, 'cause my whole PhD is turmeric. And so, as I was so excited to share the research, I sat in that research for months because I really wanted to impress this group of doctors, like hundreds of doctors. And as I read the research, I got more and more frustrated and upset because although turmeric is very powerful, the statistics and research we have on aging, I thought, okay, like you decline as you age, but it's optional. I really thought it was optional that I could out exercise it. I could out diet it. I was just going to stay like as young and vibrant as I've always been all the way through. But if you understand the science behind glycation and how we get more inflamed over time and cellular decline and insulin resistance and all those things that kind of slowly chip away at us, then it's such a powerful indication of why we're struggling with our health at the level we are. Because we have this toxic burden of life, we've got a lot of different factors, stressors that are affecting us. So I love that you highlighted that. Go to your family and get a more detailed history. How many of us even know when our mother entered menopause? How many of us know what her perimenopause experience was? Was she even aware of it? Or did she just push through it and have no idea? And so you're right, when we go into the doctor's office with, not only is my entire family diabetic and have issues, if we have more understanding of it, we can get that better support.
Absolutely. And I think we have to feel empowered to say, you know what? I'm going to show up to my doctor visits with a little binder or a big binder of all the information, because you know your doctors are going to ask you certain questions, right? And I want to be clear, when I say doctor, I mean all kinds of healthcare practitioners, right? Whomever you are going to for your care. And I think, we have to show up to be, with the answers to all those questions. We have to show up prepared. It's a big new rule, so to speak, of owning our health, because for years, like their parents often had one practitioner taking care of them for their life. Like my parents had one doctor for their primary care doctor for 20 plus years. Like in my mind now, that is remarkable. That's just not what we get anymore. We have doctors leave the practice, new ones come in, and that really means we have to show up to our appointments prepared, um, because they don't know us, they don't have that history of us, and so we're going to have to do a lot of storytelling. Another big thing I think for a lot, it surprised me, and I think I'm guilty of doing this as well. A lot of doctors say, don't bury the lead. Don't, start with what feels most important when you come to
True.
visit with me, because I think a lot of us will sort of go over all the things. And then as we're walking out the door, we're like, oh, and by the way, sex became really, really painful this year. Okay, bye. And they're like, wait, that's a really important thing that I want to talk to you about, and so really come with your list of symptoms, your family history. And then what doctors want us to do is organize those lists when it comes to priorities in our lives. What is
Sure.
impacting us the most, so that then we can say, okay, let's start there.
Correct. Yeah, I think oftentimes we don't show up that ready, that organized. And doctors don't have an hour and a half all the time for us. And so we kind of need to show up ready. I'm doing that right now. I'm making lists so I can show it to my doctor and say, you know what? These are my top 3. These are my top 10.
I love
And
that.
I can already see the correlation in the top 10. And I always self-diagnose, self-treat. So I'm like, well, it's kind of getting to a point as you're in perimenopause that's important to bring on the experts. Because I don't understand the nuance of how to prescribe estrogen in these things, but I do know that it's necessary and the gradation of it matters, like the nuances of it, as you called it. And so as you wrote this book, I know you talked about these new rules. What are some of those old rules that we need to unlearn when it comes to women's health?
Mm. I think a big old rule that we all have to ditch is this idea that we're tough and we can power through. Like, oh, yeah, I got hot flashes, but my mom dealt with them. My grandma dealt with them. I can deal with them too. It's all good. The old way of doing things in terms of like buck up, buttercup, you got this, like, suck it up, move forward. Doctors don't want us to do that. The good healthcare practitioners don't want us to do that. They want us to talk about our symptoms. And here's the why is actually because conditions that are causing our suffering or symptoms that are causing suffering that we might not think are a very big deal are actually kind of a big deal. Like take hot flashes, for example. Untreated hot flashes, and when they're recurrent, that can actually impact our heart disease risk later on. What we now know is that hot flash is a full body inflammatory response.
Right.
And so if we're not treating these to not only ease our suffering, but also to tame that inflammation, that could potentially be having detrimental effects later on. And so it is time to stop powering through. It is time to say, look, my suffering is unacceptable. Like, here's what I'm dealing with. What have you got for me let's look at this and let's treat it. I think related to that is pain. A lot of times women we power through our pain. I interviewed Dr. Vonda Wright, who's an orthopedic surgeon, right? And she says, Megan, it's only the women who I treat who wear their pain, their high pain tolerance like a badge of honor. She's like, we gotta take that badge off because pain that goes untreated gets worse and actually sensitizes us to pain in a way that less pain stimulus actually creates what feels like more pain. And so these are two old ways of thinking that we really have to ditch and move forward in a way that honors ourselves, right? We need to say, look, I'm worthy of treatment.
It's true, actually, and I wonder if it's kind of multifactorial, the why. We have so many women who came before us. I know my own mother was a very successful entrepreneur. She pushed through. She didn't go to the doctor. She followed the same template as her mom and her family. Just work so hard, give everything to the kids in your family, and you'll take care of yourself later. Well, take care of yourself later just means I'm looking at her now at 70 and I'm like, you are a ticking time bomb. Yeah. I need to hire a team called I have a feeling we are walking toward Alzheimer's and you aren't seeing the very beginning stages of it. But I know what inflammation does over time. So I know what is coming and I need to put a neurocognitive team around you. And now I have to go do that research because I don't even know how to. Like, who's the neurology team for this? What am I going to do? Yeah. I think also as women, it's almost like because we're used to being gaslit, we gaslight ourselves. We're so used to going to the doctor and the doctor's like, you're fine. It's just your period. Everything looks normal. Yeah. You'll be fine. And I went through that experience yesterday. I had my period and it was a tough day for me. By the end of the night, I was like, I am I had a bone dead tiredness inside of me. I thought, is this what my clients are talking about? When they say that perimenopause makes them so tired, they can't do anything. And I thought back through my day. I was like, well, I had my normal office day with my team. I picked up my kids. I ran 4 errands. I picked up the next kid from a debate tournament. I had my dinner beforehand because I eat dinner 3 hours before bed. Got no steps in, but that's okay. Finished my day. That's a normal day for me. I have that many things I do in a day on a normal basis. Why do I feel like someone literally sucked the energy out of me and put it aside? And I thought this could be a transition. This could be a perimenopause transition. You could be anemic. You should probably call your doctor. And then another voice in me said, it's probably nothing. They'll probably say it's nothing. Why are you going to go waste your time? And so based on everything you're sharing with me today, I really think that it's so important that we all pick up this book and read it and understand ourselves better, but also hear those encouraging words of you matter. Like you said in your book, you need to be the CEO of your health. You need to take charge. And like you just covered, which I loved, your symptoms are telling you a story. And that story matters.
Absolutely. But we don't know what the story is if we don't know what symptoms to be on the lookout for, right?
Correct.
And so I think even you just sharing that story from yesterday, it's so relatable, right? Because we're just like, I got this, like, so I'm miserable today. It's because of my period. What, no big deal. Right. And you are so right. I think because we live in a culture where we often get, the pat on the head, don't complain, don't hype up. You've got this, power through, you're tough. We don't even know what to clue into, and I think that really was a North Star when I was writing this book. is to, and it goes two ways. There's one aspect in you need to know what the symptoms are so that you can say, uh-oh, I've got all these symptoms. Can we have a conversation about this? But I think also there are times when we might be like, our hair's on fire, like we feel a lump in our breast, for example. And we're like, oh my God, I'm dying of breast cancer. I got to get everything ready. And now my kids are going to not have a mom and all the things. And we go to the dark place so quickly.
Yeah.
And in the breast health chapter of my book, for example, I point out that most times lumps that we feel in our breasts aren't cancer. And what could they be? And so I think at so many turns, you're going to find that there's really reassuring information to help you say, okay, I found a lump. This means I'm going to get it evaluated, right?
Yeah.
But before I go to the total dark place, let me at least educate myself so I know what else it could be. So that again, when I go to that doctor, I'm not like, oh my God, I'm dying of breast cancer, but rather, hey, I felt a lump. This is when it came up. This is when I first noticed it. This is how it feels like it's changed or not, and we just know what stories to bring our doctors when we have that baseline knowledge.
True. And we should also understand how our symptomology matters. So, going back to yesterday's story, I thought about it and I was like, anemia is a big deal. You having low ferritin, low iron chronically, is your body not supported? Do we want a body that's resourced or under resourced? Logically, I had to work it out for myself. You are under resourced. How well can you optimize and perform? You want to share your book with the world. That's your job now, is teach this. How much energy will you have if you don't pause and go do blood work and have the conversation? And it was still something I had to logic through myself. I don't want to go to the blood work. I don't want to make the doctor's appointment. I don't want to waste my time. I know in 2 days I'm going to feel fine and then I can be off and running again, right? So we have a lot of justifications we do around this. But also, I think understanding our bodies is always ever more important. And we have so little knowledge still on perimenopause, menopause. I mean, those books are being written right now. Everyone in the women's health space is like opening up the science. We have big clinical trials happening because women are opening these huge virtual practices. So we're getting the data right now. I'm so excited about that data.
Yeah.
I meet with Vonda Wright and Betty Murray and Amy Horniman and all these people at all the conferences. And I'm like, what are you discovering? What is the nuance of what subsect of women should and should not have specific types of HRT in different ways? Like, that's going to be fascinating to learn. But we're going to learn it right now. And so as you did your research, I know you talked about heart health. And I wanted to make sure we cover this because oftentimes, because men were studied and us women were not studied in such great depth, we don't have an awareness, like we talked about so far, around our symptoms and what they mean.
Yeah.
And so what did you discover around heart health for women?
So this was a chapter that really did open my eyes in a new way because I'm a health journalist and I'm like, why are we not talking about these things? So here are some of the biggest shockers I learned. First of all, heart disease is the number one killer of women. And too many of us don't know this. We think we're going to go from breast cancer or colon cancer or something else because traditionally we have thought of heart disease and heart attack. They happen to men. Yeah. That is not true. So it is true that before the menopause transition, heart attacks and heart issues are more common in men. But after that midlife transition, that is our number one health risk. And so every woman listening to this podcast, it's like no matter how old you are, it's time to focus on your heart. Because again, a lot of the things we do in midlife impact our risk of heart disease later on. It really is one of those conditions that now we're starting to realize, oh, this is a condition of midlife. It's too late once it's happened, right? And so, okay, it's never too late, but it's like you have power now. I think another big surprise is that our awareness around heart disease as our number one health concern is going down. This is shocking and really, frankly, scaring a lot of preventive cardiologists who are just like, uh-oh, like we need to do some kind of new marketing campaign for heart disease so that more of us understand this as an issue. Something else that really surprised me, and I think that not enough women know, is that our gynecologic history actually impacts our cardiology and our heart health path. So, for example, pregnancy complications, things like preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, even if these conditions cleared up once you gave birth, hopefully to a very healthy baby, um, that should be part of what you bring to doctors to talk about your heart risk. You might need different testing or or a preventive cardiology visit earlier in your life to make sure your heart is working well, because what pregnancy is, it's such a taxing thing that the female body does. A lot of cardiologists say it's your heart's first stress test. And complications can be a sign that you did not soar through that stress test with flying colors. And that's not to beat yourself up. It's not even to say a lot of these times there was nothing you could do to prevent these pregnancy complications. But it does mean that once you have that knowledge, this is something you should bring to your doctor in your 40s and say, "Hey, I want to talk to you about something. I had preeclampsia when I was pregnant. What does that mean for my heart health? I understand that that actually could impact my heart health. What do I need to know?" And I think that is really powerful and can help women feel empowered. Hot flashes are the same thing. If you have a history of hot flashes during the menopause transition, that is something to bring up with your doctor to make sure you are on it when it comes to your preventive cardiology visits and your assessments of your heart health. And I think that's something not enough of us are talking about. And then
Sure.
finally, there's also the facts of how heart attack shows up differently in women than in men.
True. Yes.
And this is something we all need to stay clued into, right? It's like it doesn't always have to look like that crushing chest pain or the arm pain. For women, it can be a sense of just feeling like extremely tired, right? For a period of time. It can be a sense of nausea. You feel nauseated. It can be jaw pain. It can be more subtle to the like, and unfortunately, what that means also is that women can get turned away at emergency departments. When we go with these subtle symptoms, we could be having a heart attack and get turned away. And so every cardiologist I spoke to said it's really important to, because it can be hard to know, well, is this just regular old fatigue? Like I'm exhausted all the time because of how much is on my plate, or am I having a heart attack? And cardiologists say, look, bring these symptoms up, but like clue into your intuition. Sometimes these more subtle symptoms, oftentimes it also comes with this like intuitive knowing that something is wrong.
Sure.
And then what they want us to do is that if we feel like, uh-oh, something is seriously wrong here, when you go to the emergency department with some of these more subtle symptoms, you want to say, I think I'm having a heart attack. And you say those words so that you get immediate care.
Yeah, I think that's important. I love that you highlighted that because, again, we might take our own symptoms and say, I don't know what this is. Could you help me? And they might not be clued in at all. But if we know what that lineup of symptoms can be and that it's unusual for us, that would be an unusual set of symptoms for me, then we have those words and we can at least get that workup done on ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so powerful preventive care.
Yeah, and I think that's the key word, preventive, right? And so what really we need to start thinking about our hearts and our brains as the vital organs that they are. We go say hopefully to the dermatologist to check our skin, and we've got these more surface level concerns which are important, but we have to be thinking about these organs that ultimately show up as problems later in life. But like we need to be proactively talking to our doctors now about like, hey, what can I do now to make sure, what blood tests do I need to make sure my cholesterol is in the healthy zone?
Mm.
A shocking statistic to me is that I learned when reporting this book is that more often women um, way more often women deny cholesterol lowering medications. They just
Wow.
say, nope, I don't want them, even if their cholesterol is sky high, whereas
Mm,
men are more likely to take them. And
sure.
so this is a personalized decision to make sure, to understand if a statin, say, is right for you. But I thought that was really shocking. It's like a lot of times women think like, oh, no, I got this with diet and exercise and I don't need that.
Right.
But maybe you need it.
Right.
And so I think it's really important to know that like, no, heart disease is a major risk. We need to be listening and talking to our doctors proactively about this, and not denying proven life-saving treatments because we don't think it's an issue for us.
Sure. And what's interesting there is I've been studying the work of Dr. Lisa Mosconi, who I know you interviewed in your book. And if you think about it, so women know that a lot of times in perimenopause, our cholesterol is rising. We're offered a statin. We might say no because we might be anti drugs. I'm one of those people. I'm like, unless I really need it, You are not prescribing to me. And my doctor team knows that. So they sit down with me, they're like, Shivani, like on certain cases, they'll make really big arguments to me. But we oftentimes think, I've got it. Life gets in the way. You're stressed, you're busy. You might never address growing higher, not growing, but your cholesterol number rising. But if you look at the research right now around what's happening in this huge endocrine shift, she calls it the brain endocrine shift, I believe. As we're having this shift and estrogen is just falling off a cliff, these things are going to happen. And so it's really that approach of who's supporting us from that hormone level, who's having the conversation with us about adrenal, cortisol, all our hormone health overall. And then how are we approaching this to really support ourselves holistically, not just here's a statin, which the statin will do what it's going to do. I understand it's going to lower that number, but are we not talking about that low grade inflammation that's causing it? Are we not talking about the stressors that's causing the inflammation that's running rampant in us? And so to me, I'm fascinated at this moment in my life because I am in perimenopause and I felt that brain shift happen. And I thought, no, we're not doing that. We're not the one thing you will not take away is cognitive function, memory, brain sharpness, all the things that I deeply value about myself. And so I'm following that work. And I think it's so important that we all as women pause and do this type of understanding and research for ourselves so that we can show up to our doctor, like you've been saying, with a notebook and say, these are my symptoms. This is a problem. This is when they happen in the month.
Yeah.
I need really deep testing. Like I've taken at least 3 big hormone panels at this point, just because I want to prove to my doctors that they need to start giving me estrogen. And I'm going to keep working until I find the right doctor who finally starts working with me on this, because the last thing I want is to go off a cliff when it comes to brain health. And also, like you said, 2/3 of all Alzheimer's patients are women.
Yeah.
Do we not understand what that means? We're the ones who take care of everybody else. Who's going to take care of us?
Yeah. And I think my big takeaway after interviewing Dr. Mosconi, who has done just groundbreaking research when it comes to estrogen receptors in the brain. So this was fascinating. She had to create a tracer to gauge how many estrogen receptors there are in the brain. And she couldn't even believe that this tracer hadn't been created because we just hadn't studied it. So she had to go take a step back from even the research that she initially wanted to do to say, okay, now I got to create this to then do the research. And sure enough, she found, which fascinates me, that in the menopause brain, we actually sprout more estrogen receptors. And her theory is that it's because the brain loves estrogen, we actually create more receptors to sop up any bit of estrogen that's still circulating through our body in the menopause, after menopause, right? And so that speaks to the female brain loves estrogen. And after menopause, we know that goes down. So what can we do? So my big takeaway from all the brain researchers I talk to is like, we can take steps, the same steps, that help our overall health really do help the brain, exercise being one of them. So honestly, I have doubled down on exercise. And I heard from one brain researcher who said, do this for a double whammy effect. Exercise with friends while you're socializing, because we know socializing helps the brain so much, right? It protects the brain. And so sleep, crucially important. Good nutrition, really important for the brain. And so a lot of times there are these lifestyle pillars that oftentimes we're like, I know, I have to eat well. I have to move my body. I have to sleep. I have to, socialize, have a community, but they really do move the needle. And I think that's really encouraging because for me in midlife now, I know that my brain is vulnerable because estrogen is going to go down, right? I will, because I have educated myself about hormone therapy, I will likely, when the time comes, supplement. But again, like we don't actually have really good data as of right now to show that menopause therapy, hormone therapy, otherwise known as HRT, we don't have the data showing that staves off Alzheimer's disease. It just doesn't exist. And so hormone therapy isn't a panacea to everything, right? But what we do know works is exercise, nutrition, sleep. And so I'm taking it as an opportunity to say, wow, all these different things can not only help me feel better right now, but also help my heart, help my brain, help all kinds of health factors going forward. So I think as we're waiting for the research to understand what the silver bullet might be, it's a really great time to just double down on those, well, tried and trues, you know?
True. No, it's very true. And I know we're going to start wrapping up soon. My final question to you is, what do you hope women will feel after reading this book? Like, what are those key wisdom points that you want them to take away and understand are their opportunities for their health in these new rules around women's health?
I love that question because I really feel clear on the answer, which is I want women to feel confident. I want us to feel confident being able to talk about our bodies, to talk about what's happening to us, confident to say, oh, you're my doctor. I like what I'm hearing here. I like the plan. I like this shared decision making where we have going on here. I want them to feel confident to say, I do not like you. You are not my healthcare provider, and I'm going to go find another one.
Yeah.
You know, I want the feeling to be like, I've got this. I know how to educate myself with the information that I don't know. And and then I want to take that information and get the care I deserve. And so, really, I think a lot of times we say information is power. And I really think information gives us a sense of empowerment.
Mm,
Like we get to go into our doctors and say, hey, I want to talk about this. Here's what I know. I did this myself recently. So I had never been told or taken or understood my lifetime risk of breast cancer. This is
mm,
something far too many of our doctors are not proactively talking to us about. So you can go online to one of the calculators and search, the Tyre-Cuzick model lifetime risk assessment of breast cancer. And this gives you a score. And so my score was almost at that 20% threshold, which is a high lifetime risk of breast cancer. I get my annual mammograms, but I went to my doctor, my gynecologist, and I said, I took the Tyre-Cuzick risk assessment. My score, I think it was like an 18%. I was like, can we talk about my plan? Do you think mammograms are enough? And he looked at my score. We did it again together. He looked at my last mammogram report, which had a lifetime risk assessment score on it. And he said, you know what? I think we need to get you a breast MRI. And I have to say, I walked out of that appointment not excited about the MRI. It's like, "Ugh, gosh, great. One more thing I have to do." But honestly, I felt so empowered because I felt like I really took charge in a way to make sure I was covering my bases when it came to my health. That's what I want every woman to feel is that sense of empowerment, that sense of like, I've got the reins here when it comes to my own health and my own life.
I love that. I feel like what you're saying is be the mama bear for yourself. You deserve it as well.
Oh, I love that. We're mama bears to so many other people, right? Kids, nieces, nephews, like our partners, but we can
Friends.
mother ourselves, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like be the mama bear. Show up ready. Show up because you matter too, and you need to be prepared for your own longevity. I mean, how are we going to live productive, beautiful lives if we have these significant levels of decline and there's not enough research on how to even treat it all, right? So we have to really take those reins into our own hands and be so preventive. And like you talked about, invest in our health in that gap, the 40 to 60 gap, when typically we fall off of getting the care, really come back in and have those preventive conversations in an empowered way to get the results that we deserve.
I could not love that more. And I think it is a way, a radical act of self-love. And frankly, it's a radical act of love for the people who love us, right? Because if we don't take care of ourselves, we're not going to be able to show up in the way we want to for all the people who lean on us and rely on us and love us deeply, right? And so I love that you said that. I got the chills when you said that.
Me too. I love it. Radical act of self-love. It's
Mm,
exactly what we need right now. Well,
amen.
thank you, Megan, for coming onto my podcast. I absolutely loved meeting you. I love the work you're doing in the world. I love that you partner with someone incredible like Maria Shriver, who's changing our planet and bringing these conversations forward. I'm glad that you were brave and wrote a whole book for us to highlight everything. And I can't wait to read it. I can't wait to gift it to all my friends who are struggling during this time called perimenopause, menopause. And so, everyone who's listening, check out Meghan's book. Meghan, will you share your website, your social, and where everyone can find you?
Yes, you can find me at newrulesofwomenshealth.com. You can learn a little bit more about me. I'm on Instagram at Meghan Rabbitt. And yeah, I am so appreciative of being here. Thank you for this beautiful conversation. And yeah, I really hope this book helps a lot of women. That was my driving force in writing it.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for listening in today. Check out Meghan. If you want to learn more about the Inflammation Code podcast, you can learn more about it on my website at shivanigupta.com. And I cannot wait for you guys to read this book, learn more about yourselves. Let me know what you think about it in the comments if you're on YouTube or on any of the podcast platforms. And I'll see you guys next week.